The diner smelled faintly of bacon grease, coffee, and old leather booths, the kind of place where time seemed to move a little slower, where the walls themselves remembered conversations long gone. Richard sat in the booth across from his daughter Emily, the midday sunlight cutting through the wide window beside them. He hadn't planned on this conversation happening here, of all places, but life rarely respected the timing of one's heart. He clutched a photograph in his hand, fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm he was trying to maintain. Emily had been restless all morning. She was 15, restless by nature, but today she was especially agitated. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, darted around the diner before settling on her father again. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Dad, she looks like Mom." Richard tightened his grip on the photograph. He lifted it slowly, setting it upright on the table for Emily to see. The picture, worn at the edges, showed a young woman with soft eyes and a delicate smile, their mother, Margaret, who had died more than a decade ago. Emily leaned closer, comparing the photo to the memory still haunting her mind. She had seen someone earlier that morning, a woman stepping into a corner bakery across town, who looked so much like her mother it felt like the air had been punched from her lungs. But Mom died years ago, she continued, her voice breaking on the last word. Richard let out a long breath, his chest aching with the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. He wanted to tell her it was impossible, that grief could trick the eyes, that sometimes strangers wore familiar faces. But the truth, raw, unshakable, was more complicated. He set the photo down on the table and ran his hand over his face. "I know what you saw, Emily. I saw her too." Emily's lips parted in shock. You saw her. So I'm not crazy." "No," Richard said softly. "You're not crazy. And you're not the first one to see her either." Emily blinked, stunned into silence. Her father rarely spoke about her mother. Margaret had died when Emily was just 4 years old, too young to truly remember her but old enough to carry vague impressions. Her scent, the sound of her laughter, the way she hummed lullabies in the kitchen. Most of what Emily knew about her mother came from Richard's reluctant stories and faded photographs kept in a shoebox beneath his bed. Now, here he was, admitting to something impossible. Richard leaned back, staring out the diner window as though gathering strength from the afternoon light. "I've spent years trying to convince myself it wasn't real. That maybe grief makes you see what you want to see. But it kept happening. Every few years, I'd catch a glimpse of her somewhere, a train station, a crowded street, once even across the parking lot at the grocery store. Always at a distance. Always gone before I could get close. And every time, she looked exactly the same. Not older. Not changed. Just the same woman I buried 13 years ago." Emily shivered. Goosebumps crawled up her arms. "But that doesn't make sense. People don't just stay the same. Unless," her voice trailed off, her mind spinning toward explanations she wasn't sure she wanted to consider. Richard reached across the table and held her hand. "I don't have answers. I wish I did. I've tried to track her down. I even hired someone once, a private investigator. He thought I was delusional. He told me the woman I was describing didn't exist, at least not anywhere he could find. But then last week, I saw her again. In the same town. Right here, where we live. That's why I wasn't shocked when you told me." Emily's pulse quickened. "So what do? We can't just ignore it. What if she's alive? What if she didn't really die?" Richard's jaw tightened. He had thought the same thing countless times. The day of Margaret's death was seared into him, the phone call, the accident, the funeral, the endless blur of condolences. He had seen her body. He had lowered her into the ground. There was no doubt. And yet here they were. "We find her," he said finally, his voice steady with resolve. "We find out who she is. Or what she is." Over the next week, Richard and Emily began a quiet search. They drove the streets where Emily thought she had seen the woman, stopping by the bakery, lingering at the park nearby. They asked careful questions without revealing too much, describing the woman as a friend of the family they were hoping to reconnect with. At first, nothing turned up. People shook their heads politely, offering no recognition. But on the 5th day, the owner of the bakery mentioned something that made Emily's heart leap. "Oh, you must mean Claire," the woman behind the counter said casually. "She comes in here a couple of times a week. Sweet lady. Always orders the same thing, black coffee and a blueberry muffin. She's quiet, keeps to herself." Claire. The name was foreign, but the description wasn't. Richard thanked the woman and led Emily outside, his hands shaking. That evening, they returned and sat in Richard's car across from the bakery, waiting. The hours stretched, the sun sank, and just as Emily was beginning to doubt, a figure appeared under the street lamp. Claire. The resemblance was staggering. She wore her hair differently, styled shorter, but her face, Margaret's face, was unmistakable. Emily gasped. Dad, that's her. Richard's throat constricted. His first instinct was to run across the street, to demand answers, to shake the truth out of her. But fear rooted him to the spot. What if she wasn't Margaret? What if she was just a stranger with the same face? What if he shattered Emily's fragile hope with the reality of coincidence? They watched in silence as Claire disappeared into the night. The next day, Richard returned alone. He waited until she stepped out of the bakery, then approached her cautiously. Excuse me, he said, his voice low. The woman turned. Her eyes, those familiar, haunting eyes, met his, and for a moment Richard swore the world stopped. She smiled politely. Yes. Richard's mouth went dry. He wanted to say her name, to call her Margaret, to pull her into his arms. Instead, he asked, Do I know you? The woman tilted her head. I don't think so. My name's Claire. Claire. Not Margaret. Her voice was slightly different, her mannerisms more reserved. But the resemblance was too exact to be explained away. Richard's heart pounded. I'm sorry, he muttered. You look like someone I used to know. Claire gave a small, understanding nod. I get that sometimes. I guess I just have one of those faces. She smiled faintly, then turned and walked away, leaving Richard frozen in place. He returned home torn apart inside. Emily was waiting, her eyes wide with anticipation. Did you talk to her? Yes, Richard said quietly. She says her name is Claire. She claims she doesn't know me. Emily frowned. But you don't believe her, do you? No, Richard admitted. I don't. The days turned into weeks. Richard began to follow Claire at a distance, careful not to be noticed. He learned she lived alone in a modest apartment 2 neighborhoods over. She worked part-time at a small library. She seemed ordinary in every way, except for the fact that she was identical to his dead wife. One night, unable to take the torment any longer, Richard knocked on her door. When she opened it, surprise flickered across her face. You again, she said, almost warily. I need answers, Richard said firmly. Please. I'm not here to hurt you. But you look exactly like my wife. The woman I buried. The mother of my daughter. And I can't just walk away. Something in Claire's expression shifted. For the first time, her composure cracked. She stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the apartment was tidy but sparse, as though she lived only half a life. Richard sat on the couch while Claire lingered by the window, arms crossed. I don't know who you are, she said carefully, but I think maybe you're right. I'm not who I say I am. Or at least, I wasn't always. Richard's breath caught. So you do remember me. Claire's eyes shimmered with something unreadable. Sometimes I have dreams, she whispered. Dreams about a life I can't explain. A man. A little girl. A house with yellow curtains. They feel real, but when I wake up, they're gone. I told myself they were just fantasies, the way the brain makes up stories to fill the emptiness. But then I saw you. And your daughter. And I knew. Richard's heart thundered. Knew what? That I've lived before, she said softly. That maybe I was someone else. Someone who loved you. Tears burned in Richard's eyes. He wanted to believe, desperately, but the rational part of him screamed against it. Yet sitting across from her, seeing the way her hands trembled as though holding onto invisible threads of memory, he couldn't deny the truth pressing in on all sides. Emily joined them days later. When she walked into Claire's apartment, her knees nearly buckled. For the first time, she was face to face with the ghost of the mother she barely remembered. Claire knelt in front of her, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't understand it, she whispered, but I feel like I've loved you forever. The 3 of them sat together long into the night, tangled in confusion and wonder, grief and hope. No answers came, only more questions. Was Claire truly Margaret reborn? A twin sister never known? A trick of fate, a second chance wrapped in mystery? It didn't matter. What mattered was the bond they felt, fragile, inexplicable, but real. For the first time in years, Richard allowed himself to believe in miracles. And Emily, staring into the eyes of the woman who shouldn't exist, whispered the words she had longed to say her whole life. Mom.